Countryside. How we doing? Good. Good to see all of you guys that are joining us here tonight, and all of you joining us online, and our friends over in Sundance. And I just, right off the bat, have to get this out of the way because I've been getting lots of comments this week. Last week, obviously, was Easter. Now, people have gotten used to a certain tradition here at Countryside, and that's the fact that I always talk about new ways to melt the little marshmallow birds called Peeps, right? It's kind of an Easter tradition. Now, last week I didn't do that, and there was a good reason for that, and I gave you a little hint, and that's that we found that the more we pushed the Peep melting envelope, really it got to a point where it got a little bit dangerous. And so I had the guys out on assignment trying to find some new ways to do it, and it got a little bit out of hand, and that's why we didn't do it last weekend. And we've got some of that on video, so check this out if you would.
Hey, Nathan.
Oh, hey, James. What's up?
Mark asked us to take a look at the Peep thing again this year for Easter.
Thing. Okay.
Yeah. Seems that he wants us to experiment with some new ways of doing the Peep thing.
Okay. What's he thinking? Does he have any specific ideas?
No. He didn't give us any limits or guidelines. So he just said something that we've never seen before.
Okay. Well, I think we can come up with something. Why don't we head to the kitchen and we'll see what we can do.
Sweet.
Okay. Let's go.
Bigger.
No, but we've never seen the Peep with belly on it before.
Wee! Wee! Wee!
Yeah. Kind of cool. Still needs to be bigger. Yeah? Yeah?
It's still not there. Hey, I got an idea. Come on.
Hey, James, it doesn't look like it's doing anything. Do you really think this is gonna work? What was that? I can't hear you.
Huh? That'll do.
I think that was it.
Oh, don't applaud. That'll just encourage them. Obviously, some guidelines were probably in order, and I'll not make that mistake again. And just so you know, there were millions of peeps harmed in the making of that film. So that's just the way it is. Hey, it was a great week last week to see the bridge come together, to see that the message come together, that Jesus is the one that came and paid the price for us to build that bridge, that we have a need for that ultimately we build a bridge because we got to get from one side to another of a gap. We've got to span that gap. And we talked about last week that ultimately we've got to give up the human side of that, trying to build that bridge ourselves, and instead understand that it was Jesus and Him coming for us, Him living a perfect life, and Him sacrificing and then rising again at that Easter, that ultimately that's what built the bridge for us. And last week we had 11 people cross that bridge of faith. That was awesome. 11 brand new Christ followers that we know of that filled out their cards. We had dozens and dozens of people recommit. So many people just celebrating what Jesus has done in their lives. Did you guys enjoy last weekend? Did you enjoy that? It was really good. And way to go, guys. And thank you to all the volunteers to put that together. Ultimately, guys, Easter is the most important holiday there is because everything depends on the resurrection. It's because of the resurrection of Christ that we can have hope. That if you at some point in your life have chosen to walk into that relationship with Christ, if you've walked across that bridge that He built through His sacrifice, now you have hope. Now you have a future. You have power to live this life. Because let's face the facts that life is not easy. It's just not. I wish it was. I've been following Jesus for almost 30 years, and you know what? My life is not easy. Your life is not easy. This world will never be perfect because this is not heaven. And so until Jesus comes back again, this world is never going to be perfect. But because of what Jesus did in building that bridge to us 2,000 years ago, when I walk into that relationship with Him, I can live with purpose. I can live with power. I can know that He's helping me. I can know that He's guiding me. I can know that He's in control, that I can trust Him with my eternity. And it's way better, guys, than living without Him. Even with all the troubles of this world, I want to do it with Him. I don't want to do it without Him. Reality tells us that in our lives, we all have issues. We all have gaps. We all have things we need to work on. Nobody's perfect except for Christ. And here's the thing that I want us to talk about this weekend is that when we walk across that bridge of faith, when we walk into that relationship with God, the great news is that He wants to help us with those gaps. He wants to help us process and work through those things in our lives that need to change. And one of the biggest areas that we need to deal with is the issue of relational gaps, relational problems, difficulties, breakups, misunderstandings. We all have those. That's something that we're all going to experience. Now, sometimes people can live with that, depending on their personality. They can kind of live with some of those relational issues and gaps in their lives, and maybe it doesn't faze them that much. But I believe that, once you cross that bridge of faith, once you come to God, once you accept what He did for you on that cross, that He's going to begin doing some things in your heart. And part of that is that you're going to look at your relational world. And if there are some issue out there, if there are some broken relational bridges out there, you're not going to be okay with that. You're going to want to do something about that. And as we follow Christ, He will encourage us to begin to build and repair those broken relational bridges. Now, here's the complicated piece, is that we can't control how other people are going to react. We can't control other people. We can only control what we do. And I would just say, though, that we need to do our part. that God will encourage us and help us to do our part. He's going to maybe even encourage us to do some things that aren't very comfortable. Like maybe we reach out a hand, like maybe we write a note, maybe we make a phone call. And just as that bridge was extended to us from God, maybe God's calling us to extend a bridge to somebody else. Now, some of you this weekend, you've got some breakups, you've got some issues, you've got some baggage, you've got some of those gaps that you're dealing with. But again, as we walk in that relationship with God, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're all going to get back together with our ex-wives or whatever that is, but it is going to mean, are we willing to ask the question, what can we do? What would God have us do in any situation, any of those relational issues? Because here's the thing, if I asked you guys, look, you know what, let's all raise our hands if you've ever had any kind of a relational hiccup. Now you don't have to because it's going to be everybody, okay? Literally, we've all had this. This is part of life. And it causes significant issues. Think about all the time and energy that you spend dealing with relational issues in your life, problems, difficulties, frustrations. Now, I would say this, that if you look at the most difficult ones, maybe a broken marriage or a parent-child kind of deal where they're not talking to each other, something really big, and you look at something like that and you think, man, that's never going to get healed under God or under just our own power, and just from a human point of view, that there's no human way that those things are going to get repaired. And so here we are, we're a week after Easter, and what I can tell you is that the same power that raised Christ from the dead, that same power, the Bible is very clear that power is available to us. It's available to us, and God wants to apply that power to our lives, to those gaps in our lives. If we're willing to extend those things, we're open ourselves up to that. The power to maybe heal some of those gaps, to rebuild some of those bridges. But the reality is that it takes a lot of courage to do that. You think about some of the situations in your life, people who have hurt you, difficulties, breakups, and you think, man, it is going to take a huge amount of courage, because maybe you're carrying some scars, maybe you're carrying some wounds, and again, you can't control how other people are going to react. But God would ask you, what about your part? What can you do to rebuild some of those bridges? Because ultimately, guys, God gave us the ultimate example of that, didn't He? He gave us His only Son. Jesus, who went and died a horrible death. Why? Only because He loved us that much. He did that for you. He did that for me. I hope that you've responded to that, since so many people did last weekend. And since He did that for us, then we can't help but see the reality that God's asking us to do the same for others, to extend grace to others. Can you imagine the difference in our world? If people all over the world, when we felt misunderstood, that instead of being angry and walking away, that we did everything that we could to work out those issues, to clear up the misunderstandings, to fix those things. And instead of pouring salt on each other's wounds, instead we became bridge builders. And we understand that, obviously relationships, they break up for all kinds of reasons. Neglect and conflict and abuse and selfishness and, again, misunderstanding. And there's so many reasons. But two things I want to say about that first before we jump into the meat of this. And the first thing is this, is that, guys, I am not talking about an abusive situation. If you're in an abusive situation, I hate to have to give this caveat every time I talk about relationships, but it's the world that we live in. If that is not God's plan for you, it is not okay. And if you're in an abusive situation, you need to get safe and get help. You need to do both, and you need to do those immediately. You need to get safe, and you need to get some help. But let me talk about misunderstandings for a second. Misunderstandings are the thing that God or that the devil loves to use to mess up relationships. The easiest way the devil can trip us up, to get us off course, to wreck our marriages, to make us too busy and too tired to be on mission with him, is to get us messed up relationally. Where we take those misunderstandings and and instead of fixing them, we let them roll into something more than they should be. And we see it all around us, broken relationships between husbands and wives, parents and kids, employees and employers. It's life. It's human nature in so many ways. It's a struggle that we all deal with. I had a situation just come up not too long ago, a few weeks ago. I have a friend of mine who's the president of a large company, very successful company, and you think, all right, obviously this guy's got a lot on the ball. He's very good with people, and he really is. And I was talking to him, and he was complaining to me because he was in a tiff, a misunderstanding with one of his board members. Well, here's the thing. I know the board member, and I know both of them, and I know that neither one of them have a bad intention in this situation. Neither one. And yet he's telling me, I'm angry, and the board member's telling me I'm angry, and I'm like, you guys need to work this out. And both of them were digging their heels in and didn't want to fix it. So what do? How do you repair the breach? How do you rebuild the bridge? How do you restore the relationship? Because the bad news is that we're going to have these relational breakdowns in our life. We live in a fallen world. We blow it. We sin. Other people sin. We make mistakes. They make mistakes. They might be intentional. They might be unintentional. Right now, this weekend, some of you are feeling the pain from something like that. You're dealing with some kind of a relational issue. And even as I begin to talk about this subject, maybe you're thinking about somebody. Maybe somebody just popped into your mind, that person, that family member that you're not talking to, something like that. And there's a strain there, maybe a total breakdown. Maybe you're not at the even speaking stage. And maybe there was a bridge there at one time, but that bridge has collapsed. Well, the good news is that Jesus modeled for us this bridge repair concept that we can all copy. We can all copy this. But there's a key to it, and here it is. It's a quality. It's a character issue. It's something that we don't talk about much in society. It's something that we don't see modeled on TV very much. I saw a quote just the other day from Tiger Woods' dad, who's now gone, but a few years ago, before he died, he said this to a reporter, and I couldn't believe it. He said, Tiger will do more than any man in history to change the course of all humanity. And I was like, he's a golfer, right? Like, more important than Gandhi and Jesus and, come on. But his father believed that. You see, the Bible tells us that the key to great relationships is humility. Write that across the top of your notes, humility. Look at 1 Peter 5:5. It says this, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. Clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. Humility, now here's the mistake that we make, okay? Listen for a second. Humility is not, it's not thinking less of yourself, okay? We just immediately think humility, I got to put myself down. No. Take that out of your mind. That is not correct. Humility is not thinking less of you. It's about thinking more of others. It's about seeing people as God sees them, created by Him, to be loved by Him. You see, the Bible is very clear what God thinks about pride and humility. There's over 150 verses in the Bible that deal with the issue of pride. God in a nutshell says this. Well, let me just say this first. Our kids, as they've been growing up, occasionally they'll say the word hate. And we're like, that's an ugly word. Don't say that word. They said, well, what should we say instead? So we said, say severely dislike instead of hate. God severely dislikes pride. Severely dislikes pride. He loves it when his children express humility. He loves it when his children act in humility. Again, not thinking less of yourself, but thinking more of others. Does that make sense? The Bible is also literally packed full of promises for those who are humble. The Bible tells us that God saves the humble, that God supports the humble. Proverbs 25, God guides the humble, teaches them his ways. The Bible tells us that God gives wisdom to the humble. God rescues the humble. Matthew 23, God exalts the humble. Proverbs 15, God honors the humble. The cross shows all of us that we are infinitely valuable, but we are also deeply flawed. The cross shows us we are infinitely valuable. Did you catch that? But we're deeply flawed. We live in a flawed world. Humility is all about keeping those two things in balance. All right? The reality of that you are infinitely valuable to God, but you're deeply flawed. We all are. And humility is all about keeping those things in balance. Humility is having a realistic evaluation of yourself. Again, not denying your strength, but being honest about your weaknesses. Humility is not about denying the gifts that God has given you, saying, I'm no good, I can't do anything good. Have you ever seen somebody kind of practice that kind of humility? And that's not real humility. That's usually false humility. That's usually just a fishing kind of a thing for a compliment. Humility essentially comes down to loving God and loving people. The greatest commandment, to love God and to love others. The tagline that we use around Countryside, passion for Christ, compassion for people. Love God, love others. You see, there's always a horizontal element to love and a vertical element to love. That's the cross. That's what it is. You need both. To love God, right? To have passion for him. That's the vertical piece. To love your neighbor, to have compassion for the people around you. That's the horizontal piece. When we get those two things right, when we are so focused on loving God and so focused on loving the people that he created, that we begin to forget about ourselves a little bit. And that's kind of the humility zone that we need to be in. And so what I want to walk you through this weekend are just some truths, some ways that we can rebuild those bridges. But I've got to warn you, okay, because every one of these takes humility. It all begins in humility. The great news is that Jesus modeled for us perfect humility in what he was willing to do that Good Friday, what he was willing to do that Easter. So if we want to work on a relational bridge, and I put this in your notes, we need to ask for God's help. We need to ask for God's help. Now, here's the thing. You guys could be all over the map on this one. You might be in the camp where you ask for God's help on a regular basis. You don't have any issues with that. You might be on the other extreme of that where you would never, ever, ever, unless you were getting pulled over by a policeman, ever ask for God's help, right? And you know who you are. All right, I'll tell you a story. I was with a buddy, and we were driving through Wyoming. And for some reason, Wyoming, I love to contribute to their, books for the kids there in their school districts. And we're driving through Wyoming. I think we were on our way to Denver because I had to take him to the hospital for treatment, or we were going to a baseball game, one or the other. I can't remember which one. And I was driving a little too fast, coming up over the hill. Sure enough, there's the policeman there, right there. And you throw up that quick little prayer. Too late, right? Pulled me over. All right, so I got the ticket. I paid the ticket. I thought it was all over. Well, the problem is it was in Crook County. Our friends in Sundance think this is very funny. It was in Crook County. And they published a little thing in the Sundance newspaper called the Police Blotter. Are you aware of this? Okay. So I get a call from some folks who go to Countryside on a regular basis, whose parents at that time were living in Sundance. And they called up and they said, "Why is your pastor in the police blotter this week?" Horribly embarrassed. So there's I'm laying it out for you, okay? Guys, if we're honest, we're not good at asking for help because it takes a measure of humility. You know, it feels almost un-American to ask for help. It's kind of this macho thing. It's you know what, I'm not lost. I'm not going to ask for directions. You know, I'm just driving in circles for fun, right? Ladies, don't elbow your husbands right now. We're supposed to be able to figure all this stuff out on our own. But it takes a measure of humility to come to God and say, "God, I need your help with this relationship. I don't know what to do. I don't know what step to take next." It can be so hard to do, but remember this, James 4:6, God opposes the proud, but gives what? Grace to the humble. Here's the thing, you know what? I read that verse, look at that verse again. God opposes the proud. Personally, I would rather not be on the opposite line of scrimmage from God. Maybe you're okay with that. I'm not so excited about that prospect. The Bible says in Philippians, don't let selfishness guide what you do. Think of others. Think of others first. Well, I would tell you right now, if we're going to do that, there are going to be times, many times, oftentimes, daily times, when we ask God for help. Not an easy thing to do. But if we want to have real relationships, if we want to deal with those gaps in our lives, it's got to start with us asking for help. The next piece, very important on this repair mission, acknowledge my part. I need to acknowledge my part. Again, this is so not fun, right? Let's blow up some more peeps. I don't want to talk about this anymore. This takes courage and humility. Look at Galatians 6:5. It says, "For we are each responsible for our own conduct." I was flipping channels a couple of days ago, and got to some news program, and they were interviewing Ozzy Osbourne, okay? So I stopped for a moment, remember my childhood. And Ozzy, of course, is a wreck. Drugs have ruined him. He was just being very honest with this gal that was interviewing him. And he's like, "I don't have any short-term memory." He goes, "I'm just a wreck, and he goes, "I can't help but think about what I should have done with my life." And he said this, I'm not making this up, he said, "Maybe I should have gone to church." I went, maybe you should have. He said, "Maybe I shouldn't have done that drug, or maybe I shouldn't have done that other drug." But then he went on to say, "You know what, but I made the choice and I have to live with the consequences." There's always consequences to our choices. There always is. Healthy relationships require us to accept the responsibility for our part. My wife is a gem. I love her. I can't tell you how much I love this girl. But she's a therapist. It is very hard to be married to a therapist. I'll tell you why. Because when I come home and I've had a relational issue with somebody, and I say, "Oh, so-and-so made me so angry today," she doesn't do what most wives would do. "Oh, honey, it's okay. I'm sure you were right." She says, "Well, what was your part in all of this? What do you need to learn from this exactly?" I'm like, "Can't you just pretend I'm always right? Even though you know that that's not true." She has this little saying, "What's the nugget of truth?" Because even if 99% of what they could accuse you of is absolutely incorrect, there's almost always a little nugget of truth in there. And if you're going to deal with the gaps in your life, if you're going to allow God to do that, you got to hear the nugget of truth. I don't like to hear the nugget of truth, but I need to hear the nugget of truth. Because a relationship takes two people, it takes two to tango. It means it's never just one person's problem, it's our problem. It's not your problem, it's our problem. The Bible is very clear from a theological standpoint that we have all fallen short. All of us have. Think of the people sitting next to you right now. Let me tell you what. They have all messed up. Don't look at them. Use your peripheral. Don't make it so obvious. All of them have. They've all messed up. Every single one. Using your peripheral? And then go ahead and look up here. Because I'm the number one mess up. I'm the number one mess up. See, people get this weird idea that somehow Christ's followers think they're perfect. No. It's just the opposite, actually. They've realized that they're not. And they want to ask God for help. The church is not a hotel for people who think they're perfect. It's a hospital for mess-ups. And we've all blown it. Admitting that, it is the beginning of healing. Healing for us, healing for our relationships. A willingness to let God really come in and begin to work on those gaps that we all have. And that's where we need to start. To let God come in and really begin to deal with those things one at a time. And even though right now you're sitting next to some very sketchy people, I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that you want to grow. Every relationship that you are in has one common denominator. What is it? You. It's you. And we're all selfish. All sin has a root in selfishness. It all has a root of selfishness to it. From the moment that you are born, you come out saying, feed me, diaper me, clothe me, pamper me, burp me. Christina gets so irritated when I do that. But if I'm going to have it took you a second to get that, didn't it? If I'm going to have great relationships, I got to be willing to acknowledge my part. You catch that? And as you grow in your relationships, as God begins to work on those gaps in your life, with his help, we're going to be a little less self-centered. And we're going to begin to think more and more of others first. What else can we do? And this is the big one. Allow grace. We need to allow grace. Because, guys, let's be real. You know, if we can just admit this right now, we would really like to hold people to a standard that really isn't human. We don't want people to be human that we're in relationship with. We want them to be perfect. We want to hold them to a standard that we can't even meet. I heard it said one time, we have this way of judging ourselves based on our intentions and judging others on their actions. So we give ourselves credit just because we intend to do something right. But if other people's intentions are great but they don't come through, then that's not cool. Well, let's go back to humility. What is humility? Humility is recognizing that no one outside of Jesus is perfect. Nobody. We've all blown it. Everybody does. Look at Colossians 3:13. It says, make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must what? Forgive others. You see the motivation? You have been forgiven. You've been shown grace. You've walked across the bridge of faith that God built for you with Jesus' sacrifice. And so now, offer that grace to others. Allow them to be human. As much as you want grace to be extended to you, extend that grace to others. In Ephesians 4, it says this, be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other. Make allowance for each other's faults because of God's love. In 1 Corinthians, it says, love is always ready to make allowances. That is the loving thing, the grace thing. It's unloving for us to hold people to a standard that even we can't keep. But again, back to the caveat. If you're in an abusive situation, that is not okay. That is not God's plan. And you need to get safe and get help. You can have, I'm not talking about not having boundaries here, guys. I'm not talking about walking back into a relationship where you get hurt over and over and over again. You should have boundaries there. But you can still forgive that person without maybe having to walk back in until it's a safe thing to do. Does that make sense? You need to get safe and get help if you're in a tough situation. You need to offer yourself some grace. Now, maybe this weekend, maybe you're just kind of checking out the whole Christianity thing. Maybe you came because of Easter and something caught your attention a little bit, and so you came back this weekend. You're just kind of considering the whole thing. And so I want to explain something to you right up front. You see, because when you walk across that bridge, when you become a follower of Jesus, you participate in an exchange. It's the best way I can explain it. You see, Jesus gave his life for you and for me on the cross so that we can have our past forgiven, so that we can have purpose and power to live with every day, so that we can have a home in heaven someday. It's a pretty good deal, don't you think? And when you become a follower of Jesus, what we give to him in return is our love. We give him our life. We decide, you know what? All the days of my life, I'm going to, as best as I can, I'm going to go God's way instead of my way. I'm going to give God my hopes and my desires and my dreams and my ambitions. And I'm also going to give him my failures and my flaws and my sins and my defects and my weaknesses. I'm going to give him my goals. I'm going to give him my plans. Obviously, this has huge implications for your life, doesn't it? And if we can stop concentrating on our rights and instead concentrating on doing the right thing, what's the right thing to do? Well, what's that tagline that we use? Passion for Christ, compassion for people. Love God, love people. When we do it that way, we can be so much happier. We can receive so many more blessings. And the amazing thing is that when we give those things to God, who can do a better job of fulfilling your rights? You or God? Who can do a better job of defending you? You or God? Who can do a better job of fulfilling your needs? You or God? And of course, the ultimate example of that is Jesus. Jesus humbled himself. He came to earth. He allowed himself to be killed. Rose again. Why? To build a bridge. He has shown us how to do the repair work, how to break or how to fix those broken relational bridges in our lives, and to at least do our part. Can you imagine how humbling it was for God to come down in human form? I mean, Jesus rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday on a donkey, right? A beast of burden. The ultimate example of humility. Here he is. God had the right to be praised. He had the right to be adored. He had the right to be loved. He had the right to be honored. And he gave up those rights. He allowed himself to be humiliated, to be mocked, to be spit on, to be beaten. He gave his life. He stretched out his arms on the cross and allowed himself to be nailed to it. Why did he do that? Only because he loves you that much. He loves you that much. He gave up his position in heaven. He came to earth to die for you, to say, this is how much you matter to me. This is how much you matter to me. He did that for love. And that's our model, guys. He's our example. Look at Romans 15:5. It says, may God, who gives this patience and encouragement, help you live in complete harmony with each other, as is fitting for followers of Christ Jesus. In other words, God who gives you the power to live every day, who gives you the power to develop patience that we don't have, who gives you the encouragement that we all need, help you live in harmony with each other, as is fitting for us who claim to be followers. That's the starting point. The starting point is walking into that relationship with Jesus, building that relationship with him so that you have that power, so you have that place. If you have not walked across that bridge of faith, I would encourage you to do that. And then one more thing, and then we'll be done. The other thing that just breaks my heart is just sadly this weekend, I know some of you are blaming God right now for some pain in your life. You had an expectation. This was going to be great. This relationship was going to work. My husband wasn't going to die. Whatever it was, you had this expectation. It did not work out that way, and you're angry with God. You're angry with God. And before you can resolve conflict with other people, guys, I got to tell you, you need to resolve your conflict with God. There's a gal that I've known for a long time. She used to come here. She doesn't come here anymore because her brother died a couple years ago. Her brother died, and he was upper middle age, late 50s, early 60s. And she'd prayed for him not to die, and he died. And she's so angry with God now that she can't even bring herself to church. She can't even talk to God anymore. And I talked to her. I encouraged her. I said, he's the one you need to lean on. He's the one that you need to lean into right now. But she just can't let it go. And so I'm going to urge you this weekend. Make peace with God. Make peace in your heart. Allow the peace of Christ to invade your life so that then you can begin to have peace with others. But it starts with that vertical component. And once we have that vertical component, then we can start working on the horizontal component. To have passion for Christ. To have compassion for others. You can invite Jesus, the master bridge builder, to come into your life, to begin to work on your heart so that you can have the peace that we all need, so that he can be the one who will help you build and repair the relational bridges in your life. The same power that allowed him to rise again at Easter is the same power he wants to offer you every day to repair those bridges in your life. And it's the best way to live. Passion for Christ, compassion for people. Pray with me if you would. Father, as we come this weekend, Lord, I know that in so many ways we have opened up a can of worms. And we realize, God, that there are so many complicating factors right now. So many of us just feeling a lot of angst about a certain relationship. And it might be a coworker or a boss. It might be one of our kids that we're having issues with. It might be a parent or an ex-wife or an ex-husband. God, who knows? It could be so many different things. But God, it's so real. It's so raw. It's so painful. And so, Father, I would ask right now, God, would you give us the peace that can only come from you? Would you give us, Father, that fresh outlook, that fresh injection of power? God, that we could begin to live in that vertical component, that reality of what life with you was like, where you inject us with power and peace to live every day. And then, God, that we could begin to apply that to those gaps in our life, that we could begin to apply that horizontally to those relational issues, those relational breaks, those broken bridges, Father, that we want so badly to repair. And to realize, God, that there's going to be situations that we can't fix Maybe people have passed on, or maybe, it's just something we can't control other people's reactions. But God, what's our part? What can we do? Father, to ask you for help, to realize, God, that certainly we have a part to play, and to realize, God, that we need to offer the grace to others that you've offered to us. Lord, that's what we need to do this weekend. That's what we need to go home from church right now and maybe begin doing. Maybe make a phone call, write a note, go see somebody. Father, whatever that might be, I pray that you'd help us do it. God, and that at the end of the day that we'd realize, Father, that you're that one bridge that can never be broken. You're that one relationship in our life that will never let us down. God, you're the one that will empower us to live every day. You're the one that we get to spend forever with. Father, thank you for that great, amazing gift. And we do love you. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. And everybody said,